Hello, my name's Kelly and welcome to my channel. I'm here today to do my February wrap-up before we get any further into March. Although, having said that, I filmed my January wrap-up in quite a timely fashion and then it took me 2 weeks to actually edit it, or get round to editing it rather, because if you've seen it you know that I didn't spend that long on the editing. But anyway, let's hope that I get this up soon-ish. This is what I read in February, plus 2 others which I don't have physical copies of. So yeah, let's get on with it. The first book I read is a science fiction novel that I'm pretty much the last one to read. It is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. This is very popular on YouTube and just quite well regarded generally, although I think the sequel, Ready Player Two, might have put a little bit of a dent in its prestige because I've heard that it's not very good and kind of quite obviously cashing in on the popularity of this. But I do think they're making a film out of the second one. And actually, that's the reason I finally got around to reading this one. Because of lockdown, I've rewatched everything good multiple times and I've started watching everything bad. And not that I consider Ready Player One particularly bad, it's just that it was the only thing I had left on Netflix that I hadn't watched, and I couldn't watch it until I'd read the book. So finally read the book, or listened to the audiobook, which was narrated by Will Wheaton, is it? And it was a pretty good audiobook. This is set in the year 2044 in, well, the world is a dystopia and the population is so discontent with the grimness of reality that they exist largely in the virtual utopia that is the Oasis. The Oasis's founder, James Halliday, has passed away, but when he died, I think 4 years before the start of this book potentially, he launched a global competition whereby he left Easter eggs and set clues for the Oasis users to solve, and whoever solves all the clues, finds all the keys, and wins the competition basically will win control of the Oasis and, you know, riches and fame and all that jazz. Our protagonist is a teenager called Wade who lives his life in the Oasis too, and his best friend is in the Oasis. He's never met his best friend in real life. He goes to school in the Oasis, and he is what's known as a gunter, which is kind of a term that sprung from egg hunters because they're looking for the Easter eggs that James Halliday has set out. So he's a gunter. He's a solo gunter who aims to win the competition by himself rather than clanning up with other people and combining their knowledge, because you do need a lot of knowledge to win the competition, because James Halliday is obsessed with pop culture of decades past, especially 80s pop culture, and that was something that I and many others really enjoy about this book. Especially it references a film called Ladyhawke, which I adore. It's one of my favourite films, but I've never actually met anyone who's ever watched it, and suddenly it's all over this book, so I was really pleased. I felt validated. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars, but it is more like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's just that it dragged a little bit to begin with. It took me a while to get into. However, once the first clue is solved and the first key found, it really starts to rocket off, and then it's hard to put down. It's longer than it looks because the type is quite small, but I really enjoyed it. 4 out of 5 stars, would highly recommend. The second book I read is called The Practice by Seth Godin. This is a kind of self-help, business, creative guidebook kind of book. It talks about the importance of shipping your work, i.e. showing your work, and Seth Godin talks about how he's put out thousands and thousands of blog posts, but he only considers a relatively small percentage of them to be genuinely good. However, what he advocates most far above perfectionism is the value of creative consistency and the habit, the routine, the practice of just putting it out there, but always with the main motivation of contributing to mankind and helping each other. This I gave 3 out of 5 stars, but I do feel like I was rounding up to 3. It was a bit... Why am I mincing my words? I thought it was very mediocre. It didn't tell me anything new, and it doesn't inspire me to pick up anything else that Seth Godin has written. Even though I think he's right that it is important to output without letting perfectionism hamstring you. It's just, I've just told you what you need to know from that book, and you didn't buy the book or spend X amount of hours reading it, so you're welcome. The third book I read is a middle grade book called The Boy Who Met a Whale by Nizrana Farook. This follows a boy called Razi and his sister Shifa, who live in a fictional part of Sri Lanka, and the author Nizrana Farook is Sri Lankan. What happens is that a boy called Zeng washes up on their island, having escaped a sinking ship and also having stolen something important from the nefarious sailors on board, that they are now pursuing him in order to get back. And Razi and Shifa have to help him evade these sailors and also restore this stolen artifact to its rightful place. I got this book to research animal stories for work, and because it had whale in the title, I thought that this was an animal story. It's not. The whale in the story is such a minute part of it that I feel quite misled that it was in the title, but I think it's part of the author branding, because I did read another book by this author, which I'll get to later, which has a similar title structure. So anyway, we'll get to that. This book I rounded up to 3 out of 5 stars, but it's more like a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I didn't feel that the sailors posed enough of a realistic threat to maintain the tension. I didn't feel that the children were in real enough peril, so it just started to seem a little bit bumbling and inept, considering that at various times one or other of the children is in the clutches of these sailors and they're perfectly fine. Like, nothing bad really happens or feels like it is at risk of happening. So again, I found this one a bit mediocre, but I did enjoy the tropical setting, and also Razi does go through some character development, because at the start of this book he has a newfound aversion to the sea, which is unfortunate given that he is a fisher boy, because before the events of this book his father was lost at sea. So he may or may not overcome those fears in this book. The fourth book I read is an urban fantasy paranormal romance called Rhapsodic by Thalassa. This is about a woman called Calypso who is a siren and a detective of sorts. The story follows her in the present day and also 7 years previous, when she first started making deals with a shadowy fairy character called the Bargainer. He's also called Desmond. He's a fairy king called Desmond, or Des more often in the story. But more interesting than his fairy king identity, I find, is the identity of the Bargainer, because the Bargainer can give you anything, get you anything, do anything for you that you want at a price. And he always collects on his favours, except for with Calypso, who, again, he first started dealing with when she was 17. He told her, oh, you're a minor, I'll do this one for free. So he helped her out back then for free, but then she calls on him again when she's 18, and then they spend like extended time together on and off because she keeps calling in more favours. And the favours take the form of a black bead on a bracelet, and she has so many beads that the bracelet essentially goes up her entire forearm. She owes him hundreds of favours, but for whatever reason he has never collected on them until now, 7 years into the future. And I found that narrative device of going back and forth across the 7 years to be really effective at slowly uncovering what happened between them, why he left, why Des left, and why he has now returned. And it also very effectively showed how Callie became dependent upon him, and why she did content warnings for references to past rape. And I found it quite poignant how Callie kind of bought Des's company in the beginning by calling him in to grant her favours. And the fact that she sort of didn't understand her own power over him and questioned the fact of, why is he actually responding to me each time I call? Why is he not cashing in all of these favours? So I did really enjoy watching their relationship unfold. It's potentially problematic because they first meet when she's 17, but he doesn't display any attraction towards her when she's 17, although he does say that he was never able to forget about her after first meeting her. The friendship mainly is born when she's 18, although she starts to have major feelings for him, and eventually the feelings are returned. But I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars because it was exactly what I wanted it to be as a paranormal romance, and I will be carrying on with the trilogy. Considering all the sexual tension and the build-up, I have to say, when we finally got to some genuinely intimate scenes, I thought that they were a bit vanilla, to be honest, which sounds a bit pervy, but she's a siren, he's a fairy. I got there and I thought, oh, okay. The 5th book I read is another middle grade by Nizrana Farook. This one is her debut, and it's called The Girl Who Stole an Elephant, which must have been what started the structure of naming her books, with basically the protagonist who verbed an animal. That sounds dodgy, you know what I mean? The boy or girl who something verb some kind of animal. And although the elephant is slightly more present and relevant in this book than the whale is in The Boy Who Met a Whale, it's still not an animal book, and that's what I went in for. It was an adventure, and the stakes in this did feel higher than in The Boy Who Met a Whale. But I did not like the main character. The main character is a girl called Chaya, who's a bit of a Robin Hood kind of character. She steals from the rich, sells what she steals to give the money to her poor neighbours to help them in some way. So her heart, presumably, is in the right place. But at the start of this novel, she steals jewels from the Queen, which upends her life, her friend's life, her poor, downtrodden, long-suffering friend's life, and her neighbours. And they have to flee the village. They're off in the jungle, where the story does get a little bit more interesting politically, because there's kind of a little bit of a resistance gang forming. But Chaya is so arrogant. There's a female character that sort of joins them in running away, who Chaya is horrible to, like unrelentingly horrible to, and I don't feel like she has any character growth in this. I don't think that she ever really recognises that what she did was responsible for all the bad stuff that happened, even if essentially at the very end of the book, arguably they're in a better position. I don't think she's learned anything. I don't think she ever truly apologises. I didn't like her. I didn't like her. To be a bit less biased, I'll read the back of it. Thief, rebel, bandit, hero? Chaya can talk her way out of anything except stealing the Queen's jewels, even if she had the best of reasons. So she escapes on the back of a stolen elephant and leads her friends on a jungle adventure where leeches lurk and revolution is stirring. And this gives Chaya an idea. Maybe she can leave her village a thief but return a hero. So Chaya is very brave. She certainly thinks she's clever, but I didn't like her very much. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars because it was better than The Boy Who Met a Whale, and the stakes were more believable and higher, and it just felt like more of a solid adventure story. But that still rounded up from 3.5. And I don't think I'm likely to read any more Nizrana Farook books, unless she actually writes an animal story, and then maybe I'll try, just to close out this chapter. And of course my battery would run out just before I could tell you about my 6th and final book, so sorry if anything looks a little bit different on the screen. The final book I read was another middle grade. This is The Goldfish Boy by Thompson. This is quite similar actually to The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, except that that was written for adults and this is for children. It's about a boy called Matthew who is dealing with the escalating symptoms of severe obsessive-compulsive disorder. And I should say before I forget, this isn't Own Voices. The author acknowledges a Dr. Isabel Rogers in the back for opening my eyes to the debilitating condition that is obsessive-compulsive disorder. So it seems to be based on research, not direct experience. I will say, as a layperson, that it feels well done. I found it very interesting. I already knew about the obsessive compulsion for cleanliness, but another of the things that haunts Matthew, and there's something about this book that is very claustrophobic and tense, because Matthew is essentially imprisoned by the fact that everything is out to get him in his own mind, from germs to the number 13. He can't deal with the number 13. I can't even say the number 13. He'll say 10 plus 3 or the unlucky number. And if he sees a clock whose, hands are on either 13 seconds or 13 minutes, for example, he has to count to 7 in his head repeatedly to nullify the number, to cancel out that number, because that would take him to 20. He can't deal with the number 13. And there's a moment where his mum is barefoot with one foot inside his room, which is a sacred space, and he actually thinks quite seriously about slamming the door on her foot, to the point that she would probably have broken toes, just to get it off his carpet, because all he can think about is the fact that she's been in the sunroom where the cat sits up and she won't have washed her feet, and all the germs are migrating into his room and climbing up his legs, and he's living in he's living in such fear. I really wanted to give this boy a hug. The similarity to the curious incident of the boy in the nighttime is that there is kind of a mystery to solve in this one as well, because Matthew is always at home and he's always looking out of windows and watching the world go by rather than taking part in it. He is the last person to see his neighbour's grandson in the garden before that grandson goes missing. And the police can't turn up any leads, so basically Matthew and a couple of other misfits on the street play a part as well, but mostly Matthew set about trying to solve what has happened to this little boy, which does lead to him being pushed outside of his comfort zone a lot, but it isn't like he is magically cured at the end of this book. And also I should say that seeing his parents, the adult characters weren't as sympathetic as Matthew was, and actually some of the other child characters, especially the sister of the little boy who goes missing, God, she's like something out of Chucky. But I suppose children are barbarians if you catch them at the right moment, so there was something a little bit sinister and chilling in places in this book, and it was very well done. I did think it was a little bit long, so I've given it 4 out of 5 stars because the pacing had a little bit of issue due to the length, but I highly recommend this book. And that brings us to the end. If you watched my January wrap-up, you might notice that the Count of Monte Cristo is conspicuously absent because I didn't read any of it in February. And actually I've yet to read any of it in March either, partly because I'm doing all of my work basically from my bed at the moment, and I've got stacks of books, and the Count of Monte Cristo is currently at the bottom of that stack, and I haven't dared to try pulling it out, but obviously that's an excuse. This is all I've got for you for this video. I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you very much for watching. Please give it a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe if you would also like to do that. See you next time. Bye!